Talk a little bit about what happened there and how you made the transition from being somebody who worked at a job to somebody that owned their own job to eventually somebody that created jobs for other people. Welcome to the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. I'm Russell Gray, sitting in for Robert Kiyosaki, and I am super excited to be here. In today's show, we're going to be talking about what I call Main Street Capitalism, what it is, why it matters, and how becoming a Main Street capitalist is not only a great path to personal wealth and freedom, but why the world needs you to be a successful Main Street capitalist. Plus, we've got a special guest, a real world Main Street capitalist whose entrepreneurial journey has some amazing lessons, and you're really going to love that. But before we get there, let's just talk a little bit about capitalism and kind of what capitalism is, because it's a really misunderstood word. In fact, to some people, it's a dirty word. Obviously, the word capitalism is rooted in the word capital. That's probably another misunderstood word. So we're going to go ahead and throw away the economic textbooks for a minute, and we're just going to use some good old fashioned Main Street common sense. Capital is just the stuff that we all want, goods and services. If you really think about it, we really don't want the money. When you think about, oh, I want a bunch of money, what you really want is what the money will buy you. And so the stuff that you really want to have, that's capital. So money isn't capital. It's just a claim on capital. So money is really a store of value. Somebody goes and produces something, you go and produce something. You're not ready to consume your own production, or you don't want your own production because you want to trade it for somebody else's production, then you use money. And we sometimes mix up money and currency. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But money is that thing that we use as a medium, used to use as a medium of exchange, but no more. But we use it as a store of value. So if I save my money from work that I did today, 10 years from now, if I go to spend that money, if it's really money, it should be able to purchase me the same amount of stuff as when I saved it. Of course, if you understand the word inflation, you know that's not the way the world works. And that's because we took money and currency and separated it. So, currency, these little green pieces of paper, if you're in the United States, that Americans use called dollars, or wherever you are, whatever that medium of exchange is that we call money, it's really called currency, and it floats around or circulates around the economy like electrical current. It's what makes the economy work. It's very, very important. You have to have currency if you're going to have an economy. And so currency is a medium of exchange. So think of it this way. If you had two quarters, if you had two American quarters, 1964 and 1965, in 1965, either one of them would buy a gallon of gas. And today in 2024, only one will. Do you know which one and why? Sadly, a lot of people don't know this. I've done this with financial planners, people that really should know, and they do not understand. In 1964, the quarters were made of silver, and so they were both money and currency in one unit. In 1965, they took the silver out and they just gave the public zinc-plated copper tokens. And so even though they had a face value of 25 cents, they really weren't made of anything that had real value. So fast forward, when gasoline went from 25 cents a gallon to $2.50 a gallon, lost a huge percentage of value. The quarter would only buy 1/10 of a gallon, the 1965 quarter. But the 1964 quarter, because the value of the intrinsic value of the silver went up, it actually retained its value and would still buy a gallon of gas today, not by using the quarter, because you'd have to turn the quarter in for money, silver, sell it, get currency, dollars, and then go buy the gasoline. So if you want to understand how that all works, there's a website you can go to called coinflation.com, and you can see how that works. So it's really important. When you hear Robert Kiyosaki say savers are losers, he's talking about people who are trying to save currency, mistakenly thinking it's money. And then when you hear people talk about capitalism and capital, and they're talking about currency, they really think they're talking about capital or money, but they're not talking about true capital. They're just talking about a claim on capital. So there's a word in financial circles called derivatives. You probably heard about that in 2008 when the whole world blew up because of derivatives. And a derivative is not the thing of value; it's a claim on the thing of value. And so the argument that I'm making here is that capital, the goods and services that people produce, that is what is of real value. Money is merely a store of value to make a claim on those goods and services. Currency is just a medium of exchange in which to trade with somebody, to trade the value of your production for the value of their production. And so, because we print currency without equal amounts of production, that creates what's called inflation. And that's why it takes more and more currency to buy the same stuff. Now, there's one more derivative that you should be aware of when people talk about capitalism. They get very, very confused, and that's credit. Credit is a derivative of currency, which is a derivative of money, which is a derivative of capital. And so, just like Robert says all the time, your house is not an asset. You have to have good definitions, right? You have to understand what you're talking about. And so, it took me a long time to understand this because I had, like a lot of people, thought, oh, capitalism is making currency. If I trade pieces of paper back and forth, trade stocks, trade whatever, I'm a capitalist because I'm earning currency. But I'm not really a capitalist because I'm not really creating anything. So the difference between Main Street capitalism and other forms of like financialized capitalism is Main Street capitalism is actually producing real stuff. And so, and then again, you have to realize that that claim on the real stuff has to manifest in some form of cash flow. That's why Robert says that a real asset puts money in your pocket. So even a property, if you own a house and it doesn't produce income, it's really not an asset. It's a house, it's nice, and maybe you can live in it and it saves you from having to pay rent, and that's what the value is. So it provides cash flow in terms of the money you don't have to spend. But really, a property without the cash flow isn't worth much. And so, where does the cash flow come from? Productivity. What is productivity? The production of capital. So when an economy gets financialized, where it doesn't really produce anything, it just trades pieces of paper and prints money. And that's a lot of what's been going on in the United States over the last many years. It begins to get fundamentally weaker, and that weakness shows up in inflation. So if you've wondered really kind of where we're at in the cycle, why we're having the issues we're having, why Robert always talks about Nixon taking us off the gold standard in 1971, why our money went from being money to credit, or why dollars went from being money backed by gold to credit. This is what he's talking about. So I thought I'd take advantage of the fact that I've got the microphone here on the Rich Dad Radio Show to explain that to people, because I think it's important that people understand that. So capitalism, true capitalism, is where all the jobs, real wealth, and everything good comes from. Now, there's another word you hear talked about a lot called socialism or even communism. And, Robert doesn't like those things, but they're really also forms of capitalism. So I know that may sound weird, so stick with me for just a minute. Because capitalism, if capitalism is production of goods and services, in my definition, then even socialism or communism, where things are being built or created, is a form of capitalism. So the difference isn't that things are being created, the difference is who owns them. And one of the premises in communism is the abolition of private property. So ask yourself this: if you like owning things yourself in your own name or in an entity that you control, and if especially those things that pay you to own them, like rental property or businesses, being in the B and the I quadrant, if you'd prefer to keep the profits and the wealth that you earn, then by definition, you are a capitalist. And so there are people out there who want to convince you that you shouldn't own property, that other people should own the property, and then you just, get it because you happen to be alive. The problem with that is it takes away the human motivation to create. So I'm not going to get political, and I'm really not going to talk about the way things should be. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the way things are and how we have raised up generations of people to think somehow it's okay for the people who produce things to have those things taken away from them, and other people who maybe don't produce to have things given to them. Is the system rigged? 1000%. Is it harder when you're small to compete? Yes, it is. Are there things that need to be fixed? Yes. However, you're not powerless. There are things that you can do. And so, what I really wanted to do today is share with you somebody that I got a chance to meet who is done this. She's a young lady who has a business that provides some services that I actually use and need, and maybe you do too. And I'll let her tell you a little bit about that. But she grew up believing, like a lot of people, go to school, get a good job, and then save money and invest in the stock market, 401k for the long term. And as she went down that path, like a lot of people, she began to wake up. As she began to become a capitalist, her thinking changed. So I think there's so many lessons. This is probably somebody that you would never hear or see, except that I happen to know her and I want to share her with you. So without any further ado, let me welcome Leila Adnani to the Rich Dad Radio Show. Welcome, Leila.
Hello, Russ. Thank you for having me.
I am excited to have you here. So, I think what I'd like to do is really kind of go back to the well, first of all, let's do this. Let's start where you are today because let's create a baseline. We're going to kind of start where you are today, and then we're going to go back to kind of where you came from and
Perfect.
then the journey that you went through. So, tell me a little bit about, your business today, what you're doing, how you look at the world, all that.
So I own a business, PS Creative and PS Studios, headquartered in Scottsdale, Arizona, but we've got clientele all over the country. And I've owned this business for the last 13 years. And I started in Washington, D.C., pretty much right out of college.
Okay. And so talk a little bit about where you're at in life, if you don't mind. How's your business doing? And all that kind of
So the
stuff.
business, I'm proud to say, has been profitable 12 out of 13 years. The one year that it obviously wasn't, that almost took us out, was of course 2020, which, I give myself a pat on the back for being able to survive that. We went from having the best year ever in 2019 to needing government loans to be able to stay afloat and keep the lights on. So it was a real awakening and something that I could have never expected or prepared for. But in terms of life, I moved out here in 2018, January, and to Arizona, to be specific for everyone listening, from Washington, D.C., and I was ready for a change. Before I turned 30, I wanted to get either back to California where I'm from or just go somewhere new, and ended up on a business trip in Arizona, decided I was going to move my entire business out here. Mind you, I had a very established book of business and clients in DC, and long story short, that also led you to becoming a client, and I believe we met in 2020, if not early 2021. And so what we do here is we produce all types of content. We do commercial video, podcasting, digital marketing, web design, anything digital, we pretty much have a hand in. And the business right now, I'm grateful to say, glory to God, that we are doing excellent. We work with tons of like-minded, awesome individuals, and I could not be more grateful. But it's been quite a journey to keep this business thriving and afloat.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the journey because there's a lot of people out there, young people that are waking up to realize that this concept, this idea of going to college and getting a degree and then going out and getting a job and investing in the stock market for the long term, that some of the things they were promised early on didn't really turn out the way they thought, and they're looking for alternatives. And so, just imagine now that the reason we're doing the show is to kind of talk to that person, 25 years old, maybe they're just starting out, and that puts them about 10 years behind you, I believe. And again, I'm not
Yep.
asking you to age or out yourself as
Proudly
far as.
35, Ross. Proudly
Okay.
35.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm just so proud of you because you've done so very well for a young person, and I want to tell that story. So let's go back to high school. Let's go back to you being, a young, bright-eyed high schooler, thinking about what is next for you as you graduate from being a teenager into the adult world. What were you thinking? What were you being told? How were you being prepared? What did all that look like?
So I went to high school in Baltimore, Maryland at an all-girls prep school called Roland Park Country School. And Roland Park was an excellent experience. There was only 68 girls in our class, and they really did empower us to think about you can be anything. But we were held to a really, really strict educational standard, and also a community involvement standard. So I won't say that you know, we were really empowered at our high school. It was not your typical Baltimore public education experience. It was very different than that. However, the path for all of us was study for your SATs. We started SAT prep in freshman year until you took the SAT. You had that class twice a week, every week until it was SAT time. So you were being prepped and groomed and ready to go to college. Nobody really deviated from that game plan. It was just, this is what's normal. This is what you're here to do. Everything we did in high school was to prepare us to get to that next step, which was college. There was never any talk of entrepreneurship or, skipping that step to go ahead and do something different. So after high school, of course, I followed the path of I'm going to go to college. And college, looking back, is a very interesting, it's different. It was a good experience in the moment. But looking back as an adult and a capitalist, I don't think that the value proposition for how much it cost me was actually worth what I got out of it.
Okay, well, we definitely want to come back to that. We're coming up on a break. When we come back, what we want to be talking about is what happened when you got out of high school, got into college. How did college prepare you for the next level? And then the things that happened to you once you got out in the real world. Because when you're in the world of education, that's one set of experience, one set of inputs, one set of mentors, one set of opportunities and a perspective. And then when you get out in the real world, it's a very different scenario. So when we come back from the break, let's go ahead and revisit that. Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Kiyosaki. Thank you for being with us today. As CEO and co-founder of the Rich Dad Company, I can assure you, Robert and I are both dedicated to our Rich Dad mission to elevate the financial well-being of humanity. And you are the humanity. We truly want you to succeed. When you succeed, we all succeed, and our mission grows stronger. With that in mind, I'm excited to extend a personal invitation to you to elevate your financial well-being by attending our exclusive free online wealth building event hosted by Robert. You'll learn what to focus on first to start increasing your cash flow immediately. You can reserve your seat right now by going to richdadonline.com. Just go to richdadonline.com. The event is 100% free and will help you achieve your financial goals.
Okay, welcome back to the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. I'm your host, Russell Gray, sitting in for Robert Kiyosaki. And we're visiting today with Leila Adnani, who is a young entrepreneur in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we're digging into her story because I just think there's so many great lessons. The theme is Main Street Capitalism is the cure, where there's a lot of things going wrong in the world right now. And of course, the flip side of problems is opportunities. And when you look at the way the educational system is preparing young people for the real world and then the experience they have when they get into the real world, there's a little bit of a breakdown. And Layla went through that. And so we're going to pick back up. We kind of got through the high school story, Layla, and now we're have you off to college. And tell us a little bit about your college experience, whether it was what you expected and looking back, did it really prepare you for what you came out in the real world? I'd like to find out, obviously what worked, but what was missing?
Yeah, so I went to Miami University of Ohio, coming from Baltimore, Maryland. So I was an out of state student and I did not understand what student loans were. My dad, no offense to him, did not really explain what all of that would look like when I graduated. So I did end up graduating with $88,000 of student loans, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But the experience overall, it was a good experience. Did I learn a lot in a lot of different elements? Yes, I did. However, thinking about the financial components, I could have taken that it was more than 88,000. My dad did pay a huge portion of my college. So say we were to take, the entire chunk of money, and now with my capitalist mindset, I could have invested that into property back in 2007, which is when I graduated in high school. And what that would be worth now is, I mean, it's something that would be sizable, right? But instead, I spent the next 10 years trying to pay off student loans and $88,000, all accruing interest at the same time. So looking back, I started a business. I studied political science and Middle East studies. I planned to go into the State Department. Unfortunately, they weren't hiring. They were on a hiring freeze when I graduated. The economy was terrible. And I ended up getting a job working at a very popular retail store that doesn't like to be mentioned in interviews. So I will not say, but that was really my only option at that point of I have to be able to make a $900 student loan payment every month, and I don't have a lucrative job that I was promised upon graduating. Mind you, I did a semester through the State Department in Cairo, Egypt, that was completely paid for through the state. Applied, got it. I did the most lucrative program we had at Miami University inside Washington. I did that my senior year, preparing me to be able to get a great job in Washington, either lobbying or something on Capitol Hill. And I quickly realized through that experience that I didn't want to be on Capitol Hill. And during college, I interned in finance. And that was something that I realized quickly I did not want to do as a full-time career. I loved the people I worked with, but I did not like working in that Wall Street kind of world. So Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Let's go back though. I mean, one thing you said, because anybody who's a listener to the Rich Dad Radio Show knows that Robert goes off quite a bit on this the student loan situation. Student loans are the number one asset on the balance sheet of the federal government. At least it used to be. I don't know with all this forgiveness if that's still true, but it's certainly way up there. And that's
Mhm.
really there's an old adage that says borrower is servant to the lender. And so you take these young people who come out bright-eyed of high school, they get a fresh credit score. They're promised this college degree and all this great job and income they're going to get with it. They sign on the dotted line for a lot of times a six-figure loan that is unforgivable in bankruptcy. And they now have to go figure it out. And for a lot of people, it's a huge hindrance. And to your point, if they were at least given the option, hey, you can sign on this unforgivable student loan and get a college degree that's of dubious value for jobs that may or may not be out there in the real world, or you could sign on this dotted line and get a mortgage on an income producing piece of real estate that the tenants are going to make the property for you, the payment for you, and you're going to get an education in real world capitalism right from the get go. And a few years later, if you think you want to go back to college, the property will probably pay for it. So I just think that young people aren't be given these options, and I think they need to be because the world has changed, but the educational system hasn't. So I'm not going to attack it. I'm just going to say it's clearly broken. And when I heard your story, I was like, wow, we need to tell this story. So let's talk about you now out of college. You're out of college. You are working these jobs, trying to figure out how to make the payment. You had a real profound experience we talked about as we were preparing for the show. So talk a little bit about what happened there and how you made the transition from being somebody who worked at a job to somebody that owned their own job to eventually somebody that created jobs for other people.
So in college, I remember sitting in my dorm room with I lived with 10 girls at the time. And I said, I really want to start an event planning business. I think I'd be such a good event planner. And, I applied to all these tiny little companies. I never heard anything back. And so I figured, all right, that's not going to be the path for me. That's okay. I kind of wrote it off to the side. So fast forward, I'm out of college. I'm working retail. And I said, I'm going to do this for 5 months. And well, 6 months. 6 months is the max. I don't want to get sucked into this lifestyle. And at the 5.5 month mark, I had gotten a paycheck for $80 for 80 hours of work. $80. It was astounding. All of these returns had hit. It was right after Christmas. And obviously, that's not going to pay my $900 student loan payment. It's not going to pay for really much of anything. So I said, I've got to get out of here. I'd called my best client who had shopped with me at this store and I said, hey, I need to get out of this situation. Do you or anyone you know need a personal assistant? And she said, yeah, actually, my husband and I could use one. Drive down to DC, come meet him. Drove to DC, met this client and her husband at their beautiful home. And they said, all right, we'll start you at 20 hours a week, start around, I don't know, $40 an hour. And, don't quit your other job, but we'll be flexible and let's just see where it goes. So immediately at that point, I quit. I run back to that store, I put in my notice and I say I'm out. Because right there, I'm making more money than I was making being a retail slave. Fast forward, my first day on the job, I have all these bags in my hand from the Container Store, and I'm in the elevator, and the neighbor goes, oh, are you just moving into the building? And I said, no, I'm actually a professional organizer. And she said, oh my gosh, I need you. Do you have a business card? And I said, sadly, they're in my car right now and my hands are full, but can you just tell me which penthouse you're in? And I'll come back up on Monday. I'll give you my card and we can do like a full consultation. And she's like, oh my gosh, that's great. I'm penthouse 4. So I go home that day. It's a Thursday or Friday afternoon, and I file all my paperwork. I expedite it with the Maryland government to get my LLC. And then I go to Bank of America and I open up a bank account now that I've got that EIN number. And I go online and I make some business cards really, really quick. And I go to FedEx and I print these business cards. And then I print out what I think would be an estimate template, put it on a clipboard. And on Monday morning, I walk in, I knock on the door of Penthouse 4, and there's my second client. And from there, just being really scrappy and thinking on my feet, not really knowing what I was doing. Within 6 months, a gal who used to shop with me at that retail store ended up becoming my first assistant. We were working 7 days a week. We were incredibly busy. I mean, our clientele was the who's who of Washington, D.C., and everything moved really, really fast. So I went from having no money to making, within the first 6 months, I think close to $50,000 in 6, 7 months. And it was a complete change of everything. But I kind of took the leap. I saw an opportunity and I just kept moving.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably the most important takeaway from this episode for anybody that's out there, because there's a little bit of victim mentality out there. Oh, the economy's bad, or oh, the system is rigged, or oh, my
Mhm.
college degree didn't prepare me, or oh, I have student debt, or I don't have good credit, or whatever it is. But the reality is, as a Main Street capitalist, what you do is you just work with what you have, you look at opportunity when it shows up, and you go for it when you have the chance. And you did all those things, and the thing is you stuck with it, and that's what's so amazing. So I'd like to, we're kind of winding down here, we got a few minutes left, and what I'd like to do is really have you go back in time, knowing what you know now. If you could take that, that DeLorean from Back to the Future, if you're old enough to even remember that movie, and go back and find yourself when you're 20 years old, 25, maybe 20 years old, 22 years old, maybe even in high school. What would you say? What do you wish you knew then that you didn't know, that you didn't know then that you know now?
It's really hard to think about it back in high school. I think that those are such young formative times. I would say I'm gonna think about when I just really started my business. I was working with, like, the largest politicians in Washington, DC. That was kind of a big client base for me. We were doing events, we were doing digital marketing. It was kind of the new wave of digital marketing in campaigns. And I had a client sit down and he said, "You have $1 million business on your hands." And when he told me that, I just couldn't believe that. It did not resonate. I was like, "I don't know how you could think that I have $1 million business on my hands." I want to believe that, but I didn't believe it. And so, thinking back to even younger years, I think I've always had a bit of a sense of confidence that, my dad always said anything's possible. And I took that to heart. And so did my mom. But when you're out there and you're feeling a little bit hopeless, I think you need to dream bigger. And I think you do need to believe that, hey, the sky's the limit. It's not just $1 million business, it's going to be a $15 million business. Keep going after those larger goals, because even if you end up and you're at a $5 million business, you're still so much further than you would have been had you capped yourself thinking, oh, I'm never going to crack $250,000 a year. So I think my mindset was definitely the problem in my younger years, and it's something that it takes work, it takes resilience, but if you continue to pour into your education, and I don't mean formal education, I mean self-education, that's really going to help you have those building blocks to A, take smart steps, and B, find that inner confidence of seeing somebody like you and Robert Kiyosaki who've built things out of seemingly nothing.
And that's what Main Street capitalism really is all about, right? When you know how to sell, which is the core skill set of a Main Street capitalist, is what you did when you saw that opportunity with that woman who became ultimately your second client. And then, you built your business off of all of that. I mean, it's that ability to engage in a conversation that results in doing business. That's core skill set number one. But even underneath that, there's something even more important that I want to draw out. And Robert is the one who taught me this, at least the way of thinking. I always say that what you think and believe affects what you do, and that
Mhm.
affects the results you produce. But what you think is really a byproduct of your self image. The way Robert teaches it, he calls it be, do, have. And a lot of people, they listen to shows and they think, oh, I want to know what to do. And then they want a checklist of activities to do. But the problem is they go buy these books and courses and tapes and whatever. And they get all these checklists and they don't do it. And so it's not just knowing what to do, but it's being the person who will actually take that action. And you had to make a split-second decision in a moment of opportunity. And then all along, you've been stretched. You've had to believe more. So you talked about the importance of self-education. How do you do that today? Where are you learning? How are you growing? How do you keep yourself challenged?
Well, to be honest, I was gifted the Rich Dad Poor Dad book when I was in college, and I read it, and I don't think it really fully sank in. I was, of course, inspired by it, but it wasn't a playbook for my life. Now that I look back, I'm so grateful that I read it in that formative time, because those things really did stick with me in the back of your mind that you can work smarter. You don't necessarily have to work harder in order to have true wealth. So a lot of shout outs to Robert Kiyosaki. Number two, your investor mentoring club has been instrumental for me to understand what's actually happening in the real world and how it applies to me as a Main Street investor. And then the number third book that I would say has had a huge impact on my life as of recently is Tax Free Wealth by Tom Wheelwright. I met Tom at one of your conferences in Dallas, Texas, and he was incredible. We actually started yammering on about politics. But I bought the book and I said, there's a lot in here and I don't want to do it. So what did I do next? I hired Sam, my tax advisor. He's my strategist. And now I'm in a great position tax wise. And a lot of the things that I read about, learned about, I found the expert to actually implement and do for me. And it saved me a lot of headache and a lot of money. And those are just a couple good examples of tactical knowledge that I've been able to implement into my own life.
Yeah, so you managed to pay off your student debt. I believe you managed to pay off your home. You live in a home that's paid for. You
Correct.
have a business with how many people work for you now?
12.
12 employees. You created 12 jobs. And then you take people like me and you empower us to get our message out to more and more people. And of course, that network of people you're learning from. It's just amazing. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is the point of all of this is this is what can happen when you adopt a Main Street capitalist mentality. It isn't a victim mentality, it isn't hoping somebody's going to give you a handout, somebody's going to come along external to you, level the playing field, and somehow make it fair. You just have to use what you have where you are, and a big part of that is putting good ideas in your head, obviously preaching to the choir. You're here listening to this show today. Good on you. And then putting yourself in an environment where you get to consistently feed yourself good ideas, take action, and not be afraid of making mistakes. I'm sure along the way, Layla, you had some setbacks.
Oh, I've had thousands of setbacks. I mean, there's no shortage of setbacks, and there's a million opportunities that I have had to quit and to give up and just close up shop. And, some days that really does feel enticing, but the key to having a successful business is to continue pushing and pushing and pushing and keep innovating and think about how can I make something better? How can I turn this around? And you always say sales is the cure. So when you're facing those times where you're ready to quit, what I think about it is get back out there, keep selling, that will cure whatever is ailing the business at this point in time. So I've taken a lot away from you. And I also want to shout out to Marsha Petrie Sue. She's an incredible mentor, very involved in the political scene here in Arizona and nationwide. And she's somebody who's instilled that you can never be a victim, right? So political circumstances, a lot of us like to blame, well, the gas prices are so high or this or that, and that's why my business isn't doing well. And at the end of the day, we can't let politicians and what's going on in Washington be the reason we're successful or unsuccessful. And that's a big thing I learned after leaving DC.
Wow, that's awesome. So I'm going to ask you one closing question because I think it's important to give some insight into who you are. The end game for capitalists is they accumulate enough abundance in their life that their needs are met, and then they decide they want to go out and make an impact. They want to change the world. Some
Mhm.
people just want to retire and enjoy their wealth, but I think that the people who really make it in life end up never wanting to stop growing. They just stop worrying about money. If you could wave a magic wand right now and fix just one thing in the world, do you have any idea what that would be and why?
I would love to be able to inspire the younger generation, the kids who are feeling between, say, 20 to 30 even, that sense of, "I hate my corporate job, I really don't know what to do, and I wanna make a change, and I wanna be an impactful, useful member of American society." And to be able to help guide them in a direction, right? Not everybody is meant to be an entrepreneur. This is not to promote everybody needs to own a business. You can be really an incredible member of society in so many different ways. So to be able to help in that, raising up that next generation, that is important to me. And being part of a community, I believe that American values are something that we all should be very grateful for. And I would like to see that sense of gratitude disseminate further into our country versus where we're at right now, where everything seems so divided. And, think about 10 years ago, it didn't feel quite this toxic. And I would like to see that climate change where we can all be a lot more open minded and honestly innovative and kind to one another.
Well, I love that. Obviously, it's one of the things you and I have in common. We're actually working on some projects together. So you're going to be joining me out at Freedom Fest. Robert Kiyosaki is going to be speaking there. I'll be speaking there coming up here very shortly. I'm going to be introducing what we call the Raising Capitalists Project, which is dedicated to training up the next generation of capitalists. You're a big part of helping me do that. So I really appreciate that. If people are interested in connecting with you, how would they do that?
You can shoot me an email to my direct email. It's Layla at personalized.com. You can find that information at pscreative.co or psstudios.co, and you can easily get a hold of me that way.
All right, and that's Leila, Leila. And if you're interested in going to Freedom Fest, freedomfest.com, you can use promo code RAISING50 and you'll get a discount. And then if you're interested in keeping track of me, just send an email to follow@russellgray.com and I'll let you know where I am and what I'm doing and how you can pay attention. Leila and I are going to be creating a lot more content together in the weeks and months that come. So if you're interested in hearing more from us, just send an email to follow@russellgray.com. We'll take care of you. Thanks so much, Leila, for being with us today. Great show. Congratulations on your success. Love your mission. Looking forward to continuing to work with you in the months and years ahead.
Thank you, Russell, for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap. Thanks so much for listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show here. I'm sure Robert Kiyosaki will be back in this seat here shortly. Until then, you know what to do. Go out and become a Main Street capitalist. Thank you so much.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.